When you unrack the bar and go down, you see how the distance between my torso and my femur actually closes. You can feel a stretch on the glutes just by doing that. You can feel it actually lengthening, which is exactly what we want. Today's episode is going to be all about the glutes. So we're going to be focusing on 3 exercises which hit the glutes in all of their functions, and I'll be explaining the anatomical connections and biomechanics of the glutes along the way. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. The first exercise of today's workout is, of course, the hip thrust variation. I'm doing the machine hip thrust, which is plate loaded, but you guys can do whatever hip thrust is available to you, whether it be Smith machine or a barbell or a dumbbell. It's all the same movement pattern. There's just certain nuances in between. But the reason why I'm doing this lift is because you can really maximally load up the glutes, and it's almost like a glute isolation lift, even though it is technically a compound lift, but it's mainly focusing on the glutes with very minimal engagement of the other musculature, and there's no limiting factors. A lot of glute builders, like the squats or something, your quads are more tempted to give out before your glutes are. So this one's great because you can actually take the glutes through their full paces. And this is mainly training the glute maximus, which is the largest portion of all of the glute musculature. The only issue that I really have with this lift is the glutes are fully lengthened, especially the glute max, during peak hip flexion. And basically what hip flexion is, whenever you're raising your knee up like this, that's gonna be using your hip flexors, but it's basically just closing the gap between your torso and your femur right here. So whenever you can close that gap, you are going to be lengthening the glutes to a maximum degree, and that's going to be stretching them out and thus causing more hypertrophy. There's been studies on this. The largest degree of hip flexion that you are getting is actually at the bottom range of the motion down here, and you're still not getting that full hip flexion, which will really lengthen the glutes. But it's still a great exercise because once you are getting into that hip extension up here, there is a massive amount of tension put on the glutes. So there's kind of some pros and cons to this exercise, but it still really is one of the kings of glute growth. So lastly, I'd just like to talk about a little bit of a form tidbit, and I think that this is the most important one. It's just to kind of keep your limbs stacked. So when you are fully in extension like this, then you really want your limbs to be stacked down here, aka your shin bone parallel with the ground, or sorry, perpendicular with the ground, that is. And by keeping it perpendicular, then that is going to give your glutes the best leverage of contraction, and you're not going to be leaking power. Up next, we have the rear foot elevated split squats, and unlike the hip thrust where you can't really get that full hip flexion, with this exercise you definitely do get complete hip flexion, and therefore you are going to be lengthening the glutes to a very large degree, which is definitely what we want. Here, I'll prove it to you. When you unrack the bar and go down, you see how the distance between my torso and my femur actually closes. You can feel a stretch on the glutes just by doing that. You can feel it actually lengthening, which is exactly what we want. So on paper, this is a great lift, but what about in practice? Well, in practice, pardon my language, but I absolutely fucking hate it. It's just a very, very challenging lift, but you know, that's kind of like a mental mindset barrier that I've been trying to clash with and overcome, because leg training is just going to be harder no matter what. So you may as well embrace it and do something challenging. I consider this is one of the most challenging lifts you could do, barring like the Olympic lifts, which are super technical, just because not only is it a unilateral leg lift, which makes it very, very challenging, but it's also so technically challenging. There's so much balance and coordination needed. And to kind of offset these detriments, what I'm doing is using a Smith machine, which is going to be more stable than something like the barbell counterpart, and much more stable than something like a dumbbell counterpart, like Bulgarian split squats, for example. You don't have anything to hold on to. So it really is a balance and coordination lift above all else. Maybe not above all else, but that's definitely a huge component of it. Versus this lift, it takes the balance and coordination component out of it, since you are onto lifting and holding onto a fixed device because it's a Smith machine. So it's helping in that regard. If you guys did want to use dumbbells, I'd recommend setting it up to where you can hold on to something that's really sturdy, and then do a dumbbell in the other hand, and then just kind of have the dumbbell hovering over. You would have the dumbbell on the hand that's closest to the knee that you're going to be working, with the quad you're going to be working, in order to just kind of keep your balance really secure. Because if you were doing it offset, then you'd be more tempted to tip over. It would take more core engagement. So by doing it this way, you can really just focus on what we're trying to train, the leg that we're trying to train, and the glute that we're trying to train. For the third and final exercise of today's workout, I'm hitting the glute abduction machine, and abduction just means spreading away from the body. So with hip abduction, we're just working, going like this. A lot of people, mostly people do like cable abduction exercises, or like cable kickbacks. I know that's not actually abduction, that would be extension. However, this is a great exercise because the glute medius and glute minimus mainly work hip abduction. So by including a machine like this, you're going to be so stable and locked into place that you can really just kind of isolate those two muscles. And a little hot tip is, and I'm sure you've seen this before, by leaning forward, what do you think that's doing? Well, that's going to increase that hip flexion. So we're actually going to be putting the glutes under stretch in that lengthened position. So whenever you can lean forward on this exercise, I think that you should do it. And that's kind of where the machine variation overpowers something like a cable abduction raise, because with that, it's going to be very challenging to put the glutes under that lengthened, hip flexion position and really get the most out of the exercise. But with the machine variation, it almost comes naturally. Like, I actually feel stronger when I lean forward, so I'm more tempted to do it anyways. Well, honestly, I really think you guys should be including this lift too. I mean, we've really hit the whole gambit with these three exercises if you think about it. With the first exercise, just the classic hip thrust, you are just loading the glutes so well, and you're really just almost isolating. I know it's a compound lift, but it really feels like you're isolating them just because of how biased they are in that lift. And then with something like the rear foot elevated split squat, we are really lengthening the glutes to a maximum degree under great tension. And we're getting to focus on one glute at a time, which is something that's really often not done, often overlooked, I suppose. And then with this exercise, this is just kind of like icing on the cake to really complete the whole picture so that we hit every portion of the glutes that we possibly can. So anyways, guys, let me know if you're going to try all these exercises. Let me know if they're already in your plan and what you think of them. But have a good one. Bye.